My little corner of the world, a modest single-family home in a sprawling suburban development called Willow Creek Meadows, had always been my sanctuary. I'm Mark, by the way, a software engineer by trade, but my real passion lies in tinkering with electronics, a hobby I've cultivated since I was a kid, taking apart old radios and trying to put them back together, sometimes with surprising success, other times with a puff of smoke and a sheepish apology to my parents. My garage wasn't just for parking my sensible sedan, it was a lab, a workshop, a haven filled with soldering irons, oscilloscopes, breadboards, and a comforting aroma of solder and ozone. I loved the quiet predictability of my life, the hum of my servers in the basement, the meticulous order of my component drawers. This tranquility, however, was about to be short-circuited by a neighbor who seemed to operate on a different kind of current altogether, one powered by pure, unadulterated entitlement. Her name was Carol Henderson, and she lived 3 doors down. Carol was, to put it mildly, a presence in the neighborhood. She was the self-appointed queen of our little cul-de-sac, a woman whose days seemed to revolve around monitoring everyone else's adherence to HOA bylaws, whether real or imagined, and ensuring her oversized, gleaming white Tesla was always impeccably charged and prominently displayed in her driveway like a trophy. I'd had a few run-ins with her before, minor skirmishes mostly, a polite but firm email from her regarding the precise shade of beige I'd painted my mailbox. Apparently it was half a shade too dark for community harmony. Another time, a passive-aggressive note left on my recycling bin because I'd put it out an hour before the officially sanctioned HOA window. Annoying, yes, but manageable. I'd learned to just nod, smile, and quietly ignore her more outlandish pronouncements, focusing instead on my projects and the small joys of suburban anonymity. Little did I know that her obsession with her electric chariot and her casual disregard for other people's boundaries were about to collide with my meticulously managed electrical system in a way that would turn my peaceful existence upside down and ultimately force me to draw on every bit of my technical ingenuity. It all started subtly, as these things often do. A flicker of the lights here, a circuit breaker tripping unexpectedly there. At first, I dismissed it as the quirks of an aging electrical panel or perhaps a surge from the main grid. Our neighborhood wasn't brand new, and these things happened. I'd reset the breaker, make a mental note to check the wiring when I had a free weekend, and go back to debugging code or designing a new circuit for my automated garden irrigation system. But the incidents became more frequent, and then my electricity bill arrived. It was nearly double the usual amount. My jaw dropped. I lived alone, worked from home mostly, and was meticulous about energy consumption, LED bulbs throughout the house, smart thermostats, energy-efficient appliances. There was no logical explanation for such a spike. My first thought was a faulty meter, or perhaps a billing error. I spent an evening cross-referencing my smart home energy monitor data with the utility company's figures, searching for a discrepancy. The monitor showed normal usage patterns for my own consumption, but the overall draw reported by the utility meter was significantly higher. This was puzzling and a little unsettling. It felt like there was a ghost in my machine, a phantom load siphoning off power when I wasn't looking. My engineering brain kicked into overdrive. I started a more systematic investigation, a process that felt remarkably similar to debugging a complex piece of software. I began by isolating circuits, turning off breakers one by one and monitoring the external meter. The process was tedious, involving multiple trips between my basement panel and the meter on the side of my house. After several hours, I narrowed it down. There was a significant power draw that wasn't accounted for by any of my internal circuits. It had to be something connected externally, something bypassing my main panel's individual breakers but still registering on the primary utility meter. My mind raced through possibilities. A damaged underground cable? Unlikely, given the localized nature of the draw. A faulty HVAC unit drawing power even when off? I checked that. Then, a more disturbing thought began to crystallize. My house had an external weatherproof outlet near the garage, a relic from a previous owner who liked to use power tools in the driveway. I rarely used it myself, and it was usually covered. Could someone be tapping into it? The idea seemed preposterous in our quiet, rule-obsessed neighborhood. Who would do such a thing? The following evening, armed with a clamp meter and a healthy dose of suspicion, I decided to monitor that external outlet. I set up a discreet security camera I usually used for testing my home automation projects, angling it to cover the outlet and a portion of my driveway and the street. I wanted to see if anyone approached it. Then, I waited. The night was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the chirping of crickets. I tried to work on a project, but my mind kept drifting back to the mystery of the phantom power drain. It was around 2 a.m. when my camera's motion sensor sent an alert to my phone. My heart quickened. I pulled up the live feed, and there, clear as day under the dim glow of the streetlights, was Carol Henderson. She was uncoiling a heavy-duty extension cord from the back of her pristine Tesla, which was parked silently at the curb just beyond my property line. With a practiced motion, she plugged one end into her car and the other, to my utter disbelief, into my external weatherproof outlet. She even had the audacity to try and tuck the cord discreetly along the edge of my flower bed. I watched, dumbfounded, as the charging indicator on her Tesla blinked to life, its smug green glow a beacon of her transgression. The sheer nerve of it was astounding. She wasn't just borrowing a cup of sugar, she was siphoning off hundreds of kilowatt hours, effectively making me subsidize her eco-friendly lifestyle. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place: the flickering lights, the tripped breakers, the monstrous electricity bills. It was her, Carol, the HOA enforcer, the paragon of suburban virtue, casually stealing from me in the dead of night. My initial shock quickly morphed into a cold, simmering anger. This wasn't just about the money, though that was certainly a factor. It was about the violation, the disrespect, the blatant assumption that she could just take what wasn't hers without consequence. My sanctuary had been breached, not by a random thief, but by my own neighbor, a woman who likely lectured others on the importance of property lines and community standards. I saved the video footage, a crystal-clear recording of her entire operation. This wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding I could resolve with a polite chat. This was deliberate, calculated theft, and Carol Henderson had just declared war on my power grid and by extension on me. The next morning I replayed the footage, just to be sure I hadn't dreamt it. Nope, there she was, bold as brass, plugging her luxury electric vehicle into my humble outlet. The audacity was still staggering. I considered my options. I could call the police, but I knew from past neighborhood squabbles that they were often reluctant to get involved in what they might perceive as a minor neighborly dispute, especially if it could be framed as an HOA matter. I could send her a cease and desist letter, but that felt too formal, too slow, and given her personality, likely to be ignored or met with a counter-accusation. I decided the first step should be a direct, albeit carefully managed, confrontation. I needed to see her reaction, to hear what excuse, if any, she could possibly offer for such blatant thievery. Later that morning, after I saw her retrieve her extension cord, again, captured on camera, I waited until I saw her fussing with her perfectly manicured rose bushes in her front yard. Taking a deep breath, I walked over, trying to keep my expression neutral and my tone calm. "Morning, Carol," I began, my voice betraying none of the anger still simmering beneath the surface. She looked up, a polite but distant smile on her face, the kind one reserves for acquaintances one doesn't particularly care for. "Mark, good morning. Lovely day, isn't it?" "It is," I agreed. "Listen, Carol, I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been noticing a significant increase in my electricity bill lately, and well, I happened to check my security camera footage from last night." I paused, watching for any flicker of recognition or guilt in her eyes. There was none. She just looked mildly curious, perhaps a little impatient. "Oh?" she said, snipping a dead bloom from a rose. "And what did your camera see, Mark? A rogue squirrel, perhaps?" "They can be quite destructive with wiring, you know." Her condescension was already grating. "No, not a squirrel, Carol," I said, my voice still even. "It saw you, plugging your Tesla into the external outlet on the side of my garage." her hands stilled, the secateurs frozen mid-snip. For a split second, her polite mask slipped, and I saw a flash of something. Annoyance? Surprise at being caught? Before it was quickly replaced by an expression of mild confusion. Your outlet, Mark, are you sure? I believe that outlet is on the common utility access point. Our HOA bylaws are a bit vague on those external fixtures, but generally, if it's accessible from the street side, it's considered available for community use in a pinch. My garage charger was acting up last night, and I had an important early meeting. I couldn't risk not having a full charge. My jaw nearly hit the perfectly edged lawn. Common utility access point? Carol, that outlet is wired directly to my electrical panel, to my meter. It's my electricity you are using. And my camera footage shows you've been doing this for some time now, not just last night. She finally put down her gardening tools, her smile tightening. Mark, I think you're mistaken. And frankly, a little accusatory. I wouldn't dream of stealing electricity, as you seem to be implying. As I said, it was an emergency, and I assumed a neighbor would be understanding. Besides, these Teslas are so efficient, it could hardly have used much. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Carol. I persisted. My electricity bill has nearly doubled. That's not a molehill, and efficiency is irrelevant when the power source isn't yours to begin with. I have clear video evidence. All I'm asking is that you stop using my outlet, and perhaps we can discuss compensation for the power you've already used. Her expression hardened. Compensation? Mark, you're being ridiculous. I will not be accused or extorted. If you have an issue with how HOA common utilities are accessed, I suggest you take it up with the board. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual important matters to attend to. She turned her back on me and marched into her house, leaving me standing there, fuming. The sheer audacity of her denial, her attempt to twist HOA rules to justify her actions, and her complete refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing, it was infuriating. She hadn't just stolen my electricity, she was now gaslighting me about it. This wasn't just about an outlet anymore, it was about her blatant disregard for boundaries and her assumption that she could do whatever she pleased. I walked back to my house, the video files on my server feeling less like evidence and more like a challenge. If Carol wouldn't listen to reason, if she was going to hide behind fabricated interpretations of HOA bylaws, then I needed a different approach. My mind was already churning, my engineering instincts kicking in. This wasn't just a social problem anymore, it was a technical one, and technical problems, I knew, often had technical solutions. The confrontation with Carol had been utterly unproductive, if not actively insulting. Her denial was so complete, so brazen, it left me momentarily speechless. She was operating under a different set of rules, ones where her needs and interpretations trumped inconvenient things like facts or, private property rights. I knew going to the HOA board would be my next logical and likely futile step. Our HOA, Willow Creek Meadows Homeowners Association, was run by a small committee of residents who, in my experience, were more interested in enforcing lawn care standards and planning the annual potluck than dealing with actual interpersonal conflicts or, heaven forbid, accusations of theft amongst neighbors. Carol, with her assertive personality and her encyclopedic knowledge of the bylaws, however creatively interpreted, often dominated these meetings. I suspected she held considerable sway over the other, more passive board members. Still, I had to go through the motions. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board, outlining the situation clearly and concisely. I mentioned the unauthorized use of my external electrical outlet, the significant increase in my electricity bills, and the video evidence I possessed. I requested their intervention to ensure the unauthorized usage ceased and to mediate a resolution regarding the cost of the stolen electricity. I even attached stills from the video blacking out Carol's face but clearly showing her Tesla connected to my outlet. I sent it via certified mail, wanting a record of its delivery. A week later, I received their official response. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic buck-passing. The letter, signed by the HOA president, a retired accountant named Herbert Jenkins, who was generally a pleasant but utterly non-confrontational man, stated that while they appreciated my concerns. The HOA did not have the authority to mediate private utility disputes between residents. They suggested I discuss the matter further with my neighbor or consult with the utility company if I suspected a metering issue. As for the outlet status, they parroted Carol's line, stating that externally accessible utility points in proximity to common areas have, by precedent, been considered available for occasional community member use in situations of necessity. A clause so vague and open to interpretation it was practically meaningless. They did, however, gently remind both parties involved to be considerate and neighborly. It was a complete whitewash. Carol had clearly gotten to them, or they were simply too intimidated or too indifferent to challenge her. The occasional community member use in situations of necessity was pure invention, likely something Carol had concocted and Jenkins had been too cowed to question. The frustration was immense. I had clear evidence of theft, and the official body meant to uphold community standards was effectively condoning it. Carol, no doubt emboldened by the HOA's non-response, continued her nocturnal charging sessions. My security camera dutifully recorded her visits, her Tesla silently drinking my expensive electricity night after night. She didn't even bother trying to be discreet anymore. The extension cord was now left coiled near my outlet during the day, a blatant marker of her claimed territory. My electricity bills remained sky-high. I started to feel like I was living in some absurd parallel universe where basic rules of property and decency didn't apply to certain people. Sleep became difficult. I'd lie in bed, my mind racing, replaying Carol's smug denials, the HOA's anemic response. Every flicker of the lights, every hum from an appliance, made me wonder if she was out there, plugged in again. My peaceful sanctuary was feeling increasingly violated. I updated my security system, adding more cameras and even a microphone near the outlet, after checking the legality of audio recording on my own property in my state, of course. I wanted a comprehensive record of her actions, every visit, every kilowatt stolen. I started meticulously documenting everything: time, stamped video clips, detailed logs of my power consumption compared to my known usage, copies of my inflated electricity bills, all correspondence with Carol and the HOA. My engineering mindset took over. If I couldn't get social justice, I would at least have irrefutable data. I also started researching. I delved into the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC, rupees myself, looking for any clause, any loophole that could support her claim or, more importantly, definitively refute it. What I found was that while the CCRs were voluminous and often convoluted, there was absolutely nothing that sanctioned the use of another resident's private metered electricity. The common utility access point she referred to simply didn't exist in the way she described it. Common areas had their own meters, paid for by HOA dues. My outlet was unequivocally private. I even consulted an online legal forum, posing a hypothetical question. The consensus was clear: what Carol was doing was theft, plain and simple, regardless of HOA inaction. One lawyer suggested small claims court for the monetary damages, but acknowledged that stopping the ongoing behavior without direct police intervention or a civil injunction could be challenging and costly. During this period of evidence gathering, I also started noticing other subtle signs of Carol's entitlement. Cars parked slightly over her property line onto a neighbor's grass would get sternly worded notes. Children playing too loudly near her house would be shushed. She seemed to view the entire cul-de-sac as her personal fiefdom, with rules that applied to everyone but herself. My anger and frustration were slowly crystallizing into a cold, hard resolve. If the established systems, direct communication, HOA intervention, were failing me, then I needed to devise a system of my own. My workshop, my sanctuary of resistors, capacitors, and microcontrollers started to look less like a hobby space and more like a command center. Carol Henderson had underestimated me. She saw me as a quiet, perhaps slightly nerdy software engineer, someone who would grumble a bit but ultimately back down. She didn't see the meticulous, problem-solving mind that thrived on untangling complex systems, the mind that was now fully focused on her. The game was far from over. It was just entering a new, more technical phase. My workshop became my sanctuary and my war room. The sheer volume of evidence I'd collected was staggering. Hours of video footage showed Carol, night after night, coolly connecting her gleaming Tesla to my power. Audio recordings captured the click of the plug, the hum of the charger, sometimes even her humming a little tune as she went about her thievery, completely unconcerned. I had spreadsheets detailing the kilowatt hours stolen, cross-referenced with my inflated utility bills, calculating her debt to me down to the penny. It was a meticulous indictment of her actions. But evidence, as I was painfully learning, didn't automatically translate into justice, especially when dealing with someone as brazen as Carol and an HOA as spineless as Willow Creek's. I needed a more direct solution, something that would make continuing her power piracy untenable. My first thought was to simply shut off the breaker to the external outlet. It was the simplest, most obvious fix. I even tried it for a couple of nights. The result? The next morning, I found the cover of my main breaker panel, located on the exterior of my house, slightly ajar. Carol, it seemed, was not above tampering with my main electrical panel to restore power to her charging spot. This escalated things significantly in my mind. She wasn't just passively stealing available power anymore, she was actively interfering with my home's infrastructure. This was a new level of audacity. I immediately installed a heavy-duty lock on the breaker panel cover, but the incident left me deeply unsettled. She was relentless. My next idea was to replace the standard outlet with a locking one, or perhaps a smart outlet that I could disable remotely. But I suspected she'd just see that as a challenge, possibly leading to damage to my property as she tried to bypass it. Plus, any visible modification might give her grounds to complain to the HOA about unapproved exterior alterations, and knowing my luck, they'd probably side with her. I needed something more subtle, something that wouldn't immediately scream countermeasure, but would effectively render my outlet useless, or at least very unpleasant, for her specific purpose. My mind, trained in logic and systems, started to turn towards a more robust solution. I wasn't thinking of anything overtly destructive, not yet. My initial thoughts were more along the lines of inconvenience. What if the power she drew was dirty power? Full of spikes and sags that wouldn't harm standard appliances, but might make a sophisticated Tesla charging system unhappy or refuse to charge? Or what if the outlet only provided a trickle charge, so insignificant it would take her days to get any meaningful range? I spent hours researching Tesla charging mechanisms, their sensitivity to power quality, their internal safeguards. I learned that Teslas, like most modern EVs, have sophisticated onboard chargers that monitor power quality and will often refuse to charge or limit the charging rate if the power supply is unstable or out of spec. This was interesting. This was a path I could explore. During one late-night research session, I stumbled upon forums where EV owners discussed issues with charging at older homes or in areas with unstable grids. Some mentioned their cars refusing to charge if the voltage was too low or too high, or if there was significant electrical noise on the line. This sparked an idea. What if I could introduce a controlled, localized disturbance to that specific outlet, something that would make it an undesirable power source for her sensitive vehicle, but without affecting the rest of my house or posing a general safety hazard? My gaze drifted to a box of components on my workbench: high-wattage resistors, capacitors, inductors, and a few rugged-looking solid-state relays. I started sketching circuits, thinking about ways to create a current-limiting or voltage-perturbing device that would only activate when a significant load, like an EV charger, was connected. The idea was not to cause a massive, damaging surge in the way the prompt suggests an immediate battery fry, but something more insidious, something that would make charging from my outlet unreliable, slow, or simply impossible for her car, without being immediately obvious as sabotage of the outlet itself. It would appear as if my outlet was just bad for Teslas. It was a delicate balance. I didn't want to create a fire hazard, nor did I want to damage her car in a way that could be easily traced back to me as malicious. My goal was to make her voluntarily stop using my outlet because it simply didn't work for her anymore, or worked so poorly it wasn't worth the effort. I considered a device that would rapidly cycle the power on and off when a high current draw was detected. Most smart chargers would interpret this as a fault condition and shut down. Or a device that would introduce significant voltage sag under load, dropping the voltage below the Tesla's acceptable charging threshold. This felt like a more elegant solution than brute force. It would be a battle of wits, fought with electrons and circuit diagrams. I spent a weekend designing and prototyping a small, self-contained unit that could be installed discreetly within the weatherproof housing of the external outlet itself, or perhaps just upstream from it in my garage. It would monitor the current draw. If the draw exceeded a certain threshold, indicative of an EV charger, far higher than, say, a string of Christmas lights or a power tool, it would subtly manipulate the voltage or introduce noise. I built a test rig in my garage using high-power resistors to simulate the load of an EV charger. I experimented with different configurations, carefully monitoring the output with my oscilloscope and multimeter. I wanted the effect to be just right, enough to deter her, but not enough to cause obvious, immediate, catastrophic damage that could be easily pinned on me. The beauty of it was that if she ever complained to the HOA or an electrician that the outlet wasn't working for her Tesla, I could feign ignorance. Really? It works fine for my leaf blower. Maybe your car is too sensitive? The thought brought a small, grim smile to my face. This was no longer just about stopping the theft. It was about outsmarting her, using my skills to reclaim my property and my peace of mind in a way that the official channels had failed to do. The more I delved into the technicalities, the more I felt a sense of empowerment. Carol had her HOA connections and her brazen disregard for rules. I had my understanding of electricity and my ability to make it do exactly what I wanted. The game was afoot. The following weeks were a blur of meticulous planning and careful execution. I decided against anything that would cause an immediate, catastrophic failure of her car's battery, as the original story prompt suggested. While the thought had a certain vengeful appeal, my engineering ethics and a healthy dose of self-preservation steered me towards a more subtle, yet equally effective solution. I didn't want a lawsuit or a police investigation focused on me for malicious damage. My goal was to make my outlet an utterly unreliable and frustrating power source specifically for her high-demand Tesla charger, leading her to abandon it out of sheer annoyance and perceived incompatibility. My design centered around a current-sensing circuit connected to a microcontroller, which in turn would control a series of relays and high-power resistors. When the current drawn from the outlet surpassed a threshold consistent with EV charging, say 10 amps or more, sustained for more than a minute, the microcontroller would kick in. It wouldn't create a massive surge. Instead, it would intermittently introduce a heavy resistive load in parallel for very brief moments, causing the voltage to sag significantly. It would also subtly inject a tiny bit of high-frequency noise onto the line. Most household appliances wouldn't care, but a sophisticated EV charger, with its sensitive power monitoring, would likely see this as an unstable power source. It might try to compensate, fail, stop charging, or significantly reduce its charging rate to a crawl. The effect would be intermittent, making it hard to diagnose. Sometimes it might seem to start charging, then stop. Other times it might charge incredibly slowly. It would be maddeningly inconsistent. I sourced the components carefully. A reliable current sensor, a robust microcontroller I was familiar with, an ESP32 for its built-in Wi-Fi, allowing me to monitor its status discreetly if I chose, though I decided against remote control for plausible deniability, and heavy-duty relays and resistors that could handle the intermittent loads without overheating. The most challenging part was building it small enough to fit within a secondary weatherproof enclosure I planned to install in my garage right before the wiring went out to the external outlet. This kept the device itself off the exterior of the house and protected from the elements and tampering. I spent several evenings assembling the circuit on a perf board, soldering each connection with precision. I wrote the code for the microcontroller, programming the current thresholds, the duration of the voltage sags, and the intermittent nature of the faults. I tested it rigorously on my workbench using a variable AC power supply and a bank of high-power heating elements to simulate the Tesla's load. I used my oscilloscope to ensure the faults were within a range that would confuse a smart charger but not be so extreme as to instantly blow fuses or cause obvious damage to simpler devices if they were ever plugged in. It was a delicate dance of electrical engineering. Once I was satisfied with the prototype, I moved to the installation phase. This required shutting off power to that circuit, carefully running the wiring from the external outlet into my garage, connecting it through my custom-built Tesla deterrent unit, as I privately called it, and then back out. I made sure all wiring was up to code, using proper conduits and junction boxes. To an outside observer, nothing about the external outlet itself would look different. The magic, or rather the mischief, was hidden safely inside my garage. The night I finished the installation, there was a definite sense of anticipation. I double-checked all connections, powered up the circuit, and my little device blinked its status LED at me, indicating it was armed and ready. Now, all I had to do was wait for Carol to take the bait. I kept my security cameras running, of course. I wanted to capture the moment. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt, the engineer in me warring with the aggrieved homeowner. Was this going too far? But then I remembered her smug denial, the HOA's indifference, the tampered breaker panel, and the ever-present extension cord marking her territory. She had left me no other reasonable recourse. She had forced my hand. 2 nights later, my motion sensor pinged. I pulled up the camera feed on my tablet, my heart thumping a little faster. There was Carol, same routine as always. She parked her Tesla, uncoiled the cord, and plugged it into my outlet. The car's charging light blinked on. I watched, holding my breath. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. The Tesla was drawing power. My device, programmed with a slight delay to avoid triggering on initial plug-in surges, was patiently monitoring. Then, about 5 minutes in, as the Tesla's charger ramped up to its full draw, my device kicked in. I couldn't see the voltage sag from the camera, of course, but I imagined the electrons doing their disruptive dance. On the video feed, I saw the Tesla's charging light, which had been steadily pulsing green, suddenly flicker and then go out. A moment later, it tried to reinitiate the charge, blinked green a few times, and then went dark again. Carol, who had been about to walk back to her house, noticed. She frowned, walked back to her car, checked the connection, then checked the plug at my outlet. She unplugged it and plugged it back in. The same thing happened. A brief attempt to charge, then nothing. I could see her frustration mounting. She tried it several more times, her movements becoming more agitated. She even jiggled the plug in the outlet, as if that would help. After about 15 minutes of this fruitless struggle, she let out an exasperated sigh, clearly visible even on the night vision camera, angrily yanked the cord from my outlet and her car, and practically threw it into her trunk. She then got into her Tesla and drove off, presumably to find a public charger or to try her luck with her own, perhaps still faulty, home charger. A slow smile spread across my face. Phase 1 of Operation Tesla Deterrent was a success. The beauty of my solution was its plausible deniability. If Carol confronted me, I could honestly say I hadn't touched the outlet itself in a way that would damage her car. Any electrician she hired would test the outlet with a standard multimeter or a simple load like a drill, and it would likely appear fine or at most show slightly unstable voltage under heavy load, something attributable to old wiring or grid fluctuations. They wouldn't find a device designed to specifically mess with high-power smart chargers. The next morning, I made sure to be out in my yard when Carol emerged. She studiously avoided eye contact, a departure from her usual regal survey of the neighborhood. Her Tesla, I noticed, was not in its usual spot in the driveway, which suggested she might have indeed had to leave it charging elsewhere overnight. The following night, my cameras picked her up again. This time, she approached my outlet with more caution. She plugged in her car, and the same frustrating dance began for her. Charge attempt, failure, charge attempt, failure. She spent even longer this time, checking her car's display, fiddling with the settings, looking thoroughly annoyed. At one point, She even kicked the base of my wall near the outlet, a small, childish display of temper that my camera gleefully recorded. After nearly half an hour of getting nowhere, she gave up again, this time with even more visible anger, slamming her charge port door shut with a bit more force than necessary. This pattern repeated for 3 more nights. Each night, her attempts became shorter, her frustration more palpable. On the 5th night after my device was active, she didn't even bother trying. Her Tesla remained uncharged by my unwilling contribution. The extension cord, which had been a fixture near my flower bed, disappeared. I continued to monitor my electricity bills closely. The next one arrived, and it was back to its normal, predictable level. The phantom drain was gone. A quiet sense of triumph filled me. I had solved the problem, not through confrontation or bureaucracy, but through quiet ingenuity. I had used my skills to protect my property and restore my peace of mind. Carol, I suspected, would never know exactly why my outlet had suddenly become so inhospitable to her precious Tesla. She would likely chalk it up to some inexplicable electrical gremlin, a problem too annoying to bother with, especially when there were other, more reliable places to charge, and that was perfectly fine by me. The less she knew, the better. My little electronic guardian in the garage would continue its silent vigil, ensuring my power stayed mine. The silence from Carol's front was, for a while, golden. For about a week, there were no nocturnal visits, no extension cords snaking across my lawn, and blessedly, my electricity meter was spinning at its usual sedate pace. I almost allowed myself to believe that my subtle electronic intervention had solved the problem for good. Carol, I figured, had probably given up on my faulty outlet and found another, hopefully legitimate, way to keep her Tesla topped up. Perhaps she'd even fixed her own charger. I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Carol Henderson was not the type to accept defeat, especially when she felt entitled to something. One sunny Saturday afternoon, as I was meticulously pruning my prize-winning, in my own mind at least, tomato plants, Carol appeared at the edge of my driveway. She wasn't in her usual powersuit HOA meeting attire, but in casual slacks and a blouse, an expensive-looking leather handbag slung over her shoulder. Her smile, however, was all business, tight, forced, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mark!" she began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. I was hoping we could have a little chat. I straightened up, wiping soil from my hands onto my old gardening jeans. "Carol, what can I do for you?" "Well, Mark," she continued, taking a step onto my driveway, a clear territorial marker. "It's about that external electrical outlet of yours. Several of us in the neighborhood have been experiencing difficulties when attempting to utilize it for approved community purposes." My eyebrows shot up. "Several of you? And what approved community purposes would those be, Carol?" This was news to me. My device was designed to react to high, sustained loads like an EV charger. Simpler, lower-power devices should have been unaffected, unless she was now trying to rally a posse. "Oh, you know," she said vaguely, waving a dismissive hand. "Emergency charging for essential devices, powering tools for minor community maintenance tasks, that sort of thing. The point is, Mark, your outlet seems to be malfunctioning. It's causing some rather expensive electronics to behave erratically. We've had reports of charging systems cutting out, sensitive equipment refusing to power on. It's quite a nuisance." She was fishing, trying to see if I'd admit to any knowledge of the problem. "Really?" I said, feigning surprise. "That's odd. I used it just last week for my electric hedge trimmer and it worked perfectly fine." "Perhaps the expensive electronics you're referring to are a bit too sensitive for a standard outdoor circuit? Some of those newer gadgets can be quite finicky with older wiring, you know." Carol's smile tightened another notch. "Mark, let's not play games. My Tesla's onboard diagnostics indicate that the power coming from your outlet is, and I quote, unstable and potentially damaging. I had to take it to the service center, and they found irregularities in the charging port control module. They said it was likely caused by connecting to a compromised power source." Ah, so my device had been a bit more effective than I'd anticipated. Or perhaps her Tesla was just particularly sensitive to the voltage sags and noise. Good to know. Compromised? I echoed, looking concerned. Goodness, that sounds serious. Have you reported it to the utility company? If there's a problem with the power quality on our street, they should know. I certainly wouldn't want my appliances damaged. The utility company says the power to the street is fine, Carol snapped, her composure starting to fray. The problem seems to be isolated to your outlet, Mark. And frankly, given our previous conversation, and your rather technical hobbies, I can't help but wonder if you've deliberately done something to it. She was getting dangerously close to an accusation. I leaned against my garden rake, adopting a look of mild offense. Carol, are you accusing me of tampering with my own property in a way that would damage your car? Why on earth would I do that? Especially when, as you'll recall, I simply asked you to stop using my electricity without permission. If your car was damaged, perhaps it's because it was connected to an outlet it shouldn't have been connected to in the first place, under conditions you yourself described as an emergency. Maybe that emergency usage overloaded something in your car. I kept my tone reasonable, even sympathetic, but with a clear underlying message. She clearly didn't like that. Don't try to turn this around on me, Mark. I have a $500 diagnostic bill from Tesla, and they're saying the charge port module might need replacing, which could be thousands. This happened after I used your outlet, which you used without my permission repeatedly, even after I asked you to stop, and even after you tampered with my main breaker panel to continue doing so. I reminded her, my voice firm but still calm. I have all of that documented, Carol. Video, audio, date, and time stamps. If your car was damaged while trespassing on my electrical system, I'm afraid that's a risk you took. Her face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. You wouldn't dare. Dare what, Carol? Document reality? Protect my property? Perhaps you should be more careful about whose electricity you're using. As for your repair bill, I'm sorry to hear about it, but it's not my responsibility. Carol seemed to swell with indignation. We'll see about that. The HOA will hear about this. Deliberate endangerment of community members. Willful destruction of property. You'll be facing fines, Mark, possibly even legal action. On what grounds, Carol? I asked, genuinely curious now. For having an electrical outlet on my own house that apparently doesn't agree with your specific model of car when you try to use it without authorization? Good luck with that. My hedge trimmer, as I said, loves it. She was practically sputtering. You're an arrogant, manipulative geek. She finally spat out, then turned on her heel and stormed back towards her house, her expensive handbag swinging wildly. I watched her go, a mixture of relief and lingering tension in my chest. The confrontation had been unpleasant, but necessary. She knew that I knew, and she knew that I wasn't going to back down, and she knew I had evidence of her transgressions. The threat of HOA action was predictable, but I felt more prepared this time. My Tesla deterrent unit was my silent, unseen ally. Let her complain. Let her call an electrician. My outlet would appear, for all intents and purposes, normal for everyday use. It was only her specific, high-draw, long-duration charging attempts that would encounter difficulties. The ball was back in her court, but I had a feeling the game was about to get a lot more interesting, and the HOA would, inevitably, be dragged into the fray once more. Carol's parting shot about involving the HOA wasn't an idle threat. Less than 48 hours later, an official-looking envelope from the Willow Creek Meadows Homeowners Association landed in my mailbox. This time, it wasn't a vague, dismissive letter. It was a formal notice of violation and hearing. My heart sank a little, even though I'd been expecting something of the sort. According to the notice, I was being accused of creating a hazardous electrical condition on my property that poses a risk to community members and their property, and unauthorized modification of an external utility fixture resulting in malfunction and potential damage to connected devices. The notice cited HOA Bylaw 7, Section C, Subsection 4, which vaguely stated that all homeowners were responsible for maintaining their property in a safe and non-hazardous condition and ensuring all external fixtures were in good working order and compliant with community aesthetic standards. It conveniently omitted any mention of who was authorized to use said fixtures. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. I was strongly encouraged to attend to present my side of the story, and warned that failure to appear could result in default judgment and the imposition of fines and corrective action mandates. The language was designed to be intimidating, and I had no doubt Carol had a direct hand in drafting it, probably with Herbert Jenkins nervously nodding along. My first call was to my friend David, a fellow engineer who also happened to be a part-time law student with a particular interest in property disputes. I explained the situation, including my Tesla deterrent unit, careful to frame it as a device designed to prevent unauthorized high current draw rather than to intentionally cause damage. David listened patiently, occasionally chuckling at Carol's audacity. "Mark, this is classic HOA overreach, egged on by a bully," he said when I'd finished. "They're trying to scare you. The key here is that the outlet is on your property, connected to your meter. Unless there's a specific easement or bylaw granting community access to your private electricity for EV charging, which I highly doubt, they don't have a leg to stand on regarding who uses it. The hazardous condition claim is their only real angle, and that's where you need to be careful. We talked through a strategy. David advised me to get an independent, certified electrician to inspect the outlet and provide a written report confirming it was safe for standard use and met all electrical codes. If a licensed electrician says it's safe, their hazardous condition claim evaporates, David explained. As for the malfunction with Carol's Tesla, that's her problem. Your outlet isn't a universal EV charging station guaranteed to work with every make and model of vehicle, especially not for uninvited users. The next day, I called a reputable local electrician, John, who I'd used before for a panel upgrade. I explained that the HOA was making vague claims about an external outlet, and I wanted a thorough safety inspection and a formal report. I didn't mention Carol or my device. I just wanted an unbiased assessment of the outlet as it stood. John arrived that afternoon. He tested the outlet with his multimeter, checked the wiring, the grounding, and the GFCI protection. He plugged in a heavy-duty drill and ran it for a few minutes. "Outlet looks fine, Mark," he said, jotting down notes. "Properly wired, grounded, GFCI is tripping correctly. Voltage is stable under normal load, no visible signs of damage or improper installation." "What exactly are they claiming is wrong with it?" I shrugged. "They've been a bit vague. Something about it not working well with certain sensitive electronics." John raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Well, for standard household and workshop use, it's perfectly safe and up to code. I'll write that up for you in a formal letter." He charged me a reasonable fee for the inspection and report, and it was worth every penny. The report unequivocally stated that the outlet was safe, correctly installed, and in full compliance with all relevant electrical codes for its intended purpose of providing external power for standard residential applications. Armed with this report and my extensive collection of video and audio, evidence of Carol's power theft and her tampering with my breaker panel, I felt much more confident about the upcoming HOA hearing. I also prepared a detailed timeline of events, copies of my inflated electricity bills, and the HOA's previous dismissive letter. I even printed out the relevant sections of the CC, rupees that clearly defined private versus common property and made no mention of any communal rights to private electrical outlets. The night of the hearing, the community clubhouse was more crowded than usual. Word had clearly gotten out about the Tesla charging dispute. Carol was there, of course, sitting at the front table with Herbert Jenkins and the other two board members, looking prim and self-righteous. She gave me a frosty glare as I took a seat in the front row. Herbert Jenkins, looking even more flustered than usual, called the meeting to order and read out the alleged violations. Then he invited Carol to present her grievance. Carol stood and launched into a dramatic recounting of how my faulty and hazardous outlet had damaged her expensive, environmentally friendly vehicle, and posed a clear and present danger to any unsuspecting community member who might attempt to use it for legitimate purposes. She spoke of erratic power surges and potential fire hazards, painting a picture of me as a reckless homeowner intentionally endangering the neighborhood. She conveniently omitted any mention of her repeated, unauthorized use of my power or her tampering with my breaker box. When she finished, Herbert Jenkins looked at me. "Mr. Davis, do you have a response to these serious allegations?" I stood up, calm and collected, holding my folder of documents. "Yes, Mr. Jenkins, I do, and I believe the board and my neighbors will find it quite illuminating." The air in the room was thick with anticipation. Carol was wearing a smug, almost triumphant expression, clearly believing she had me cornered. Herbert Jenkins, bless his non-confrontational heart, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The other two board members, a stern-faced woman named Agnes, who was known for her meticulous garden, and a quiet man named Tom, who rarely spoke, watched me with neutral expressions. Firstly, I began, addressing the board but making sure my voice carried to the assembled residents. "Let's address the claim that my external outlet is hazardous and malfunctioning. I have here a report from a certified, licensed electrician, Mr. Raitt, John Carmichael of Carmichael Electric, who conducted a full inspection of the outlet yesterday." I held up the letter. "Mr. Carmichael's professional assessment is, and I quote, the external outlet at my address was found to be safe, correctly installed, and in full compliance with all relevant electrical codes for its intended purpose of providing external power for standard residential applications. Voltage readings were stable under normal load, and GFCI protection is functioning correctly. No evidence of hazardous conditions was found." I paused to let that sink in, then placed the report on the table in front of the board. "So, the claim of a hazardous condition appears to be unfounded, at least according to a qualified professional," Carol scoffed loudly. "That electrician obviously didn't test it with a sensitive piece of equipment like a Tesla. It's the surges that are the problem, not just stable voltage for a drill." "Ah, yes, the Tesla," I said, turning to her. "Perhaps we should discuss why your Tesla was connected to my private, metered electrical outlet in the first place, Ms. Henderson. And not just once, but repeatedly, over a period of several weeks, often in the middle of the night." I then produced my next set of documents, printouts of my significantly inflated electricity bills. For months, I experienced a phantom power drain that nearly doubled my electricity costs. After investigation, I discovered the cause. I then played a short, G-rated compilation of video clips on a tablet I'd brought, showing Carol's Tesla repeatedly plugged into my outlet. The clips were edited to show just the car and the outlet, without lingering on Carol herself, though her presence was implied. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. "This unauthorized usage, Miss Henderson," I continued, "occurred despite my direct verbal request for you to cease, and it continued even after I was forced to lock my main breaker panel because you, or someone acting on your behalf, tampered with it to restore power to the outlet you were improperly using." I produced a photo of my tampered breaker panel. More murmurs. Carol's face was now a mottled shade of red and white. "This is an invasion of privacy. You were spying on me." "I was monitoring my own property and my own electricity consumption, Ms. Henderson, which I am perfectly entitled to do, and what I found was clear evidence of electricity theft. As for the alleged damage to your car, if any such damage occurred, it happened while your vehicle was, frankly, trespassing on my electrical system after repeated warnings. Any damages incurred under such circumstances are solely your responsibility." I then addressed the board again. The HOA's previous response to my complaint about this theft was to suggest I discuss the matter further with my neighbor and to vaguely reference occasional community member use. I have reviewed the Desi HOE CC rupees extensively. There is no provision granting community members the right to tap into a private homeowner's metered electricity for personal use, especially not for charging a high-consumption vehicle like a Tesla. My outlet is not a community utility access point. It is private property. I laid down a copy of the CC rupees with the relevant sections highlighted. Therefore, I concluded, the violations I am accused of are baseless. My outlet is safe. It is not malfunctioning for its intended residential purposes. The only issue here is that Ms. Henderson wishes to continue using my private electricity for free and is now attempting to use the HOA to punish me for preventing that theft and for the consequences of her own actions. I am, in fact, the aggrieved party here, having suffered financial loss due to electricity theft and having had my property tampered with. The room was silent for a moment, then a few residents started whispering. Herbert Jenkins was staring at the documents I'd provided, his brow furrowed. Agnes was looking intently at Carol, her expression unreadable. Tom, surprisingly, spoke up. "Ms. Henderson," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Did you tamper with Mr. Davis's breaker panel?" Carol sputtered. I merely ensured that a community-accessible utility point was operational. It was an emergency." "And did you connect your vehicle to Mr. Davis's private outlet repeatedly without his permission after he asked you to stop?" Tom pressed. Carol glared at him. "As I said, it's a vaguely defined common access point, and my car needed charging. He's making a big deal out of nothing and clearly sabotaged the outlet." Herbert Jenkins finally cleared his throat. "Well, Mr. Davis, your evidence is quite compelling. And the electrician's report does seem to contradict the claim of a hazardous condition for standard use." He looked at Carol, then back at me. "The board will need to consider this information. We will deliberate and issue a written decision within 7 days." I nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I trust the board will also consider my counterclaim for the cost of the stolen electricity and the damage to my breaker panel." Carol looked like she was about to explode, but Agnes held up a hand. "That will be all for now. This hearing is adjourned." As people filed out, several neighbors gave me quiet nods of support. One woman whispered, "Good for you, Mark. She's been bullying this neighborhood for years." I left the clubhouse feeling a sense of cautious optimism. I had presented a clear, evidence-backed case. My Tesla deterrent unit remained my secret, its subtle intervention having created the malfunction Carol complained about. Yet the outlet itself passed a professional safety inspection for its intended purpose. It was a beautiful piece of defensive engineering. Now I just had to wait for the HOA's verdict and wonder what Carol's next move would be. She wasn't the type to give up easily, especially not after such a public dressing down. The week following the HOA hearing was filled with a nervous sort of anticipation. I kept my cameras active, half expecting Carol to attempt some new form of retaliation or further power pilfering, but her side of the street remained quiet. Her Tesla was conspicuously absent from her driveway for a few days, then reappeared, presumably after a visit to a legitimate charging station or after she finally had her home charger repaired. She avoided me pointedly, turning her head if she saw me in my yard, which was a small victory in itself. The neighborhood, however, was buzzing. The HOA hearing had been the most exciting thing to happen in Willow Creek Meadows since the Great Raccoon Invasion of '09, a story for another time. Neighbors who had previously only offered polite nods now stopped to chat, curious about the outcome. Most were sympathetic to my side, sharing their own minor grievances about Carol's overbearing ways. It seemed I wasn't the only one who had chafed under her self-appointed reign. Exactly 7 days after the hearing, the HOA's decision arrived, again by certified mail. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The letter was surprisingly direct. The board, having reviewed all presented evidence, found that 1. The claim of a hazardous electrical condition on my property was not substantiated, citing Mr. Carmichael's professional report. 2. The claim of unauthorized modification of an external utility fixture was also not substantiated, as the outlet was functioning correctly for its intended residential purposes. 3. Regarding Ms. Henderson's use of my outlet, the board reaffirmed that private metered electrical outlets are the sole responsibility and for the exclusive use of the homeowner unless a specific written easement or agreement states otherwise. They advised Ms. Henderson to cease any and all unauthorized connection to private utility outlets. 4. Regarding my counterclaim for stolen electricity and damages, the board stated they did not have the authority to adjudicate financial disputes between residents and advised us to seek resolution through other appropriate channels, such as mediation or small claims court. All charges and alleged violations against me were dismissed. It was a clear win. The HOA had, for once, stood up to Carol, or at least had been presented with such overwhelming evidence that they had no choice but to rule in my favor regarding the safety and status of my outlet. The part about not adjudicating financial disputes was predictable, but the directive for Carol to cease her unauthorized connections was exactly what I needed. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had stood my ground, used my skills and my intellect, and the system, however flawed, had ultimately supported my rights. I immediately made a copy of the letter. That evening, I decided to take a proactive step. I typed up a polite but firm invoice addressed to Carol Henderson, itemizing the kilowatt hours she had consumed based on my meticulous logs and the average electricity rate. I added a reasonable amount for the repair of my tampered breaker panel lock. The total came to a few $100s, not a fortune, but significant enough to make a point. I attached a copy of the HOA's decision letter and a polite cover note stating that, in light of the HOA's findings, I expected prompt payment for the unauthorized electricity usage. I hand-delivered it to her mailbox. The next morning, I saw Carol retrieve the envelope. I watched from my window as she read it, her expression shifting from curiosity to outrage. She crumpled the invoice in her fist, marched over to my property line, and threw the wadded-up ball of paper onto my lawn. Then she stomped back into her house. So much for prompt payment. But I wasn't entirely surprised. Her actions, however, gave me an idea. I retrieved the crumpled invoice, smoothed it out, and took a photo of it lying on my lawn, with her house clearly in the background. More evidence for the file. A few days later, things took an unexpected turn. I received a call from Herbert Jenkins, the HOA president. His voice was unusually grave. "Mark," he said, "I'm calling to inform you that Carol Henderson has sold her house. She accepted a cash offer, and the closing is at the end of the month. She's moving out of Willow Creek Meadows." I was stunned into silence for a moment. Sold her house? Just like that? Apparently, Herbert said. She listed it privately. Didn't even put up a for sale sign. My guess is she didn't want the neighborhood knowing until it was a done deal. Honestly, Mark, between you and me, I think your little dispute was the last straw for her. She's not used to being challenged, and certainly not used to losing, especially so publicly. While I wouldn't miss Carol's presence, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a slight disappointment that I wouldn't get to pursue the matter of the stolen electricity in small claims court. It would have been satisfying to get a legal judgment against her. However, her departure was a resolution in itself. The day Carol Henderson's moving truck rumbled down our cul-de-sac was a day of quiet celebration for many. There was no block party, no overt rejoicing, but there was a palpable sense of lightness in the air, as if a low-grade storm cloud had finally drifted away. My Tesla deterrent unit remained in place, a silent guardian. I figured it was good to have, just in case any future neighbors got similar ideas, though I doubted lightning, or rather Teslas, would strike twice in the same place. A few weeks after Carol left, I received a check in the mail. It was from a law firm, with a brief note stating it was, "in full and final settlement of any and all claims related to utility usage at Carol's former address." The amount was exactly what I had invoiced her for, 7.com.godtom.com -CL, to the brief note stating it was down to the penny. There was no apology, no explanation, just the check. Apparently, her lawyers had advised her to clear up any outstanding liabilities before leaving, or perhaps the new buyers had insisted on it. I deposited the check with a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. Justice, in its own way, had been served. Life in Willow Creek Meadows returned to its peaceful rhythm. My electricity bills remained normal. My workshop projects flourished. The new neighbors who moved into Carol's old house were a pleasant young couple with a friendly golden retriever and, thankfully, a gasoline-powered SUV. Sometimes, when I'm working in my garage, my gaze falls upon the discreetly installed Tesla deterrent unit. It's a reminder that sometimes, when faced with unreasonable people and unresponsive systems, A little bit of clever engineering and a refusal to back down can make all the difference. And if you're out there, dealing with your own neighborhood power pirate or an overzealous HOA enforcer, remember this. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to get creative. Sometimes, the most effective solutions are the ones you design yourself. Just be sure to keep it legal, keep it ethical, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find that even the most entitled individuals can be deterred